Buongiorno Anthony.
Ciao, come stai?
Tutto bene e tu?
Tutto bene, sì, sì, sì.
Bravo. Uh, I mean, we could keep this conversation fluently in Italian, I guess, but in the interest of our viewership, how about we continue in English just because being inclusive and everything? How's that?
That sounds reasonable.
Cool. So, Anthony, I got a question for you. Maybe you got
Okay.
an answer. I mean, you often do.
Ben,
So
yeah, I
let's
always
give it.
have the answer for you, Ben.
Let's give it. You always have opinions. You don't always have answers. It's not the same thing. I keep trying to explain that to you,
Yeah.
but
And
anyways.
much like AI, I'm only correct some of the time.
Correct. And just like AI, you always pretend to be correct. So there we go. So
Certain
my
air of
question is
confidence.
there's that. We've been talking a lot about vectors and embeddings and all of that in the past. And
Yes,
we've kept things a bit easy for us because we've been working with very stable data, as in data that never changes.
right.
Now, here's the bad part. Sometimes
Mhm.
data changes. I mean, it's also a good part because if data would never change, we would probably be both out of a job, I would assume.
Yeah. I mean, backups and
Um,
restores would be a lot easier.
would we even take back? Wouldn't we just take one single backup once and then be done? Because, or we could just restore on a daily basis. Because again, why not?
Right.
But anyways,
Right.
let's get back to my question. My thing is, we always talked about creating embeddings for stable data and all that, yada yada, and that is all pretty cool. But
Mhm.
how do we handle it if our data changes?
Well, Ben, I think, what I want to do here today is combine a couple of features, right? Some stuff that's existed for a little while inside of SQL Server called change tracking. Also, bringing that with what we're doing inside of the AI side of the house. There's a couple different ways we can manage the kind of the change tracking inside of SQL Server, but as a DBA, I kind of lean towards the change tracking feature that came out a couple years ago. And there's been some improvements around cleanup and retention inside of SQL Server 2025. So I wanted to bring those two things together in the demo to show you here today about what happens when we come along and we change some data in our database. And so we're using a
Cool.
Stack Overflow database. Maybe I need to come along and change something in a post. Maybe I need to make a spell correction, or maybe change some code, or maybe moderate a post for whatever reason. And at that point in time, and I change the data, well, the vector embedding that we have stored in there represents the old data, not the new data. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make sure that those things kind of stay in sync. So,
Yep.
want to get started, dude?
Sure.
All right, let's get going. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn on change tracking inside of our Stack Overflow and embeddings database. I'm going to set a retention window of 2 days. So, we'll hold on to 2 days of data and then we'll automatically roll that off with the cleanup feature here. Auto cleanup equals on. Those two parameters obviously would want to be set towards whatever the business requirements it is around your data.
Uh huh.
So that's instance level setting. We're going to switch into the database context here for our particular database. So we're going to turn on change tracking specifically on the posts table. And we're going to set the feature track columns updated equals on to track those column level updates inside the database. Because Ben, I don't know if you know this, but from an application standpoint, you probably don't want to update every column in a row every time. That can get a little bit messy. Cool. So let's look at the data that we want to look at to make the modification to. So I'm just going to pull off the row that we're going to make a change to. So I'm going to do a select against our post table and join that with posts embeddings where ID equals 4. And there we
By
can
the
see
way,
the,
I think it is really impressive how every single post in the Stack Overflow database just by their ID.
yes, well this one, because I've ran this demo a couple times. But where post ID equals 4, we can see there's the body. We're going to change the body. We're going to then, the embedding is going to be less meaningful, right? At that point in time. I also track in the post embeddings table when the embedding was created and also when it was last updated. And so we can see those columns there at the end. It was created about a month ago from the time of the recording, and we have yet to update it. So that field is currently null. And so we'll then update post. So we're just going to set it to just a shorter text string from what it is. It's much longer post in the body. And then we also update the title there. And so now we come along and we'll need to go ahead and build some infrastructure to track that change. I do want to call out that I'm using the change tracking feature over something like a trigger because when we go to update the embedding, that's an external operation, right? And that could take
Yeah,
some amount of time to talk to an external REST API. Now, obviously, we're going to do our best to make that performant, but we really don't want to have a trigger be reliant on an external HTTP accessible resource for all the different reasons you can possibly think of. Mostly performance, though. We don't want to hold that transaction open too long. So this kind of makes this operation kind of asynchronous. So there is some latency between when this is updated and when we update it, because we can choose the interval at which we update it, which we'll
agreed.
talk about in a second, right? So we can now create a
However,
Mhm.
one thing that you could do
Yes.
in that case is if you really want to make sure that nobody ever uses an old embedding, you could have something like a trigger that basically deletes the old embedding, which would not
Yes.
so rather than an update, which was you. So if that is something where people are like, we can never have an old embedding in there, even if it's just for a couple of seconds as soon as the update hits, that would probably be the way to go because,
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, relying on because there could be so many reasons why that REST API from your Olama is just not capable of generating that embedding right now because it might be overloaded, because it may not even be running, or it may not be reachable
Yeah.
because Mr.
Exactly that.
Ben played with a firewall,
Ah,
as one does.
right. Or let's be serious. What probably occurred is the certificate expired on a target resource, right?
And see, that's why I keep telling you, self-signed certificates that
Oh,
are valid for
jeez.
100 years.
Yes.
You will never run
Even
into that problem. You're
yes.
welcome.
Everyone eval Ben
Follow
for
me for
security
more
best
security
practice.
tips.
Right. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to create the store procedure. What the store procedure is going to do, it basically has two branches. Whenever there's an insert to the table, we're going to do some work. Whenever there's an update to the table, we're going to do some work. Obviously, a little bit different, but the end result is we're going to scoop out the changes from our change tracking table. We're going to ship those off to our external endpoint to generate the embedding. And based on the operation that we're doing, insert or update, we're either going to insert a new row with the embedding, or we're going to go ahead and we're going to update an existing row. And so let's go ahead and look at the code inside of that. So this sort of procedure here goes, and here you can see the insert code. So if there was a new row that came along, we would generate the embedding, which is what we're doing here on line 96. We're going to join that with the data from the change tracking table. And then you can see we have obviously where the sys underscore change underscore operation equals I. That's an inserted row. But for this example, we're doing an update. So let's look at that code path. So here we're going to update the posts embeddings table. We're going to generate an embedding for the data that we updated. And then we're going to go ahead and do that against the post table and then join that. And there you can see the update. Also going to have a change tracking logging table. It's just this table that will track these events in. So I'll go ahead and select this here, go up to the beginning of our store procedure and run that code. So we updated both the post's title and its body. And here you can see we're generating the embedding for the title. Awesome. Let's move forward. So now we have the store procedure created. Let's go ahead and create our change tracking table. Again, that's just kind of just keeping tabs on what's
Uh-huh.
occurred in our system. And now we'll execute the store procedure that we just created. So it'll scoop anything up that's in our change tracking table, do the appropriate operation, insert or update, bump it up against our REST API with the embeddings function, and then store that data back in the post embeddings table. You could do this as often as you want to do this. I could run this store procedure every 10 minutes, every 10 hours, whatever's appropriate for however long you want the lag between the data change event and the embedding being updated. So obviously that's situationally specific. We can look inside of our change tracking table here. We can see that I have an event that has occurred. And if I go and I look at the embeddings now where post ID equals 4, you can see I have some new data. The previous embedding began with 5 point something. Here you can see it's 4 point something. And it also has the updated at column updated to just a few seconds ago as we did this. So
Cool.
team, this is, I think, a pretty elegant way to kind of manage this potentially complex operation with regards to as data changes in your tables, but without having to use something like a trigger, which could potentially bring some interesting scenarios to the party. And there are plenty of other options too with change events, event streaming. We also have some things you could do with that as functions, but this is kind of the way I chose to implement this in our system here, Ben.
Pretty neat.
That's it. That's
And
pretty neat. Come on,
I mean,
this is pretty cool.
And again, I'm still impressed how you memorize all the Stack Overflow postings by their ID. However, on the next episode, I'm going to give you an embedding, and you're going to tell me which post that is. So that's going to be
All
next level.
right, I'm gonna need a calculator, a pencil, and then some graph paper. We'll figure it out.
I'm going to be interested in what kind of pencil you're going to be using for a 768 dimensional vector, but you go knock yourself out, sure. No, this is and again, I think one of the cool things here is everything you did that all sits in the engine. It's all native capability of SQL. Most of it,
Yes.
honestly, even except for the embeddings part, to be quite honest, stuff that's been around for quite a bit in SQL Server. So
Yep.
because that is one of the other things that I keep hearing from people. People have doubts about change, and people have doubts about new features and all that. And by leveraging existing functionality as
Yes.
far as possible, I think that is really helpful and I think that will also drive adoption on these features.
Yeah, I think especially between SQL Server 2022, when external table came about and be able to move data in and out of the engine without external tooling,
Uh-huh.
and now being able to do some really advanced functionality like data synchronization, AI embedding generation, REST API calls, all within the engine. I can use the tools that I'm used to as a DBA to control access to the data, right? Rather than having to set it off into a different kind of security paradigm or a different layer in my environment. It stays where it's at, and I have the control over who accesses what and when. Right, that's my
Cool.
job as a DBA to protect the platform.
Nice.
Yes.
Want to summarize what we did, as we always do, for those people that just move forward to the end of the episode because they want to hear the music again?
I just want to hear music again. You want to play the music, Ben?
I can play the music. I thought you were going to summarize it again, but
I
I
thought
can
we did
also play the
summarize.
music.
I thought we did summarize.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Okay.
there we go.
Okay.
Let's play the music.
Ciao, buona giornata.
What he said.